Welcome to the graveyard. I'm Violet Hummingbird, and this is day 7 of Spooky October. During the month of October, I am reading every night to you a new true spooky story. And I'm also discovering it along with you because I actually haven't read these ahead of time. I've sort of skimmed them to choose the right story. And today's story is by Sabrina. When I was 5, my mother was pregnant with her 3rd child. Subsequently, a larger house was needed to accommodate our growing family. We lived in Dorset, a beautiful country in the south coast of England, and as Bournemouth, our town, had hardly been touched in the Second World War, most of the houses were very old and steeped in history. My parents made arrangements with an estate agent, dropped my 2-year-old brother off at our grandmother's house, and took me house hunting with them. It was a sunny spring day, and we went from one possible new home to the next. My parents were probably growing weary by the 5th or so house. But I was too young to notice, and I remember how I rushed from room to room, exploring every nook and cranny, as curious 5-year-olds tend to do. Alas, so far every single property had had some disadvantage, or my mother fell in love with one which my father hated, and vice versa, and so the search continued. It was late afternoon when we drove past yet another house which had a for sale sign stuck on the pole in its front garden. I remember the house clearly. It was pretty large and stood directly on the corner between 2 roads. One half of the top floor was round, which made it unusual, and the agent told my parents that the house had been built just under a century ago. It wasn't on my parents' list, but they were getting desperate to find something on my father's day off, so we parked the car again and got out. Our first impression was that the house was bright and quite nice. The kitchen had a lot of wood furnishings, and my parents stopped in there to discuss the ins and outs of fitted cabinets with the estate agent. I went on ahead and explored the rest of the place on my own, as I'd done in all the previous properties. There wasn't much to see on the ground floor. The sitting room had a huge stone fireplace, but that had obviously not been used for quite some time. Aside from that and the kitchen, the ground floor boasted a dining room and a study. Both were big and empty. There wasn't a lot of exploring to do in an unfurnished house. I remember that the ceilings were pretty low, though, and thought that maybe people had been smaller in the old days. Soon I got bored of the ground floor and crept slowly up the stairs to have a look at the other rooms in the house. The adults were just making their way into the sitting room, and I didn't mind. I had wandered off alone in every house so far. The master bedroom also had a fireplace, but it was much smaller than the one in the sitting room. There were 3 more bedrooms, and one with the side facing the roads were round, and I thought that was brilliant. I ran along the curving walls, trailing my little hand along the silky wallpaper. I could hear my parents slowly ascending the stairs as I went into the last unexplored room, the bathroom. It was bright white, had 2 sinks, a toilet with an old-fashioned tank and chain suspended so high above my head that I was unable to reach it, and a big white raised porcelain bathtub which stood on 4 silver feet on a tiled floor. The feet were carved in the shape of what looked like lion's paws. I had never seen anything like it. Giggling, I walked over to the tub and looked inside. 2 young children stared up at me, what looked like a boy and a girl. They had dark hair and huge, pleading eyes. I stood still, too shocked to move, and stared back at them. It looked as if they were underwater, and they were wearing long white nighties that floated gently above their pale bodies. They were squeezed close together and didn't move a muscle. For what felt like an eternity, I stood there and gazed at them. They seemed to be a couple years older than me, and I wondered what they were doing in the bath. Were their parents looking for a new house too? "Hello," I said eventually. Suddenly, they both started wailing, screaming for help. Startled, I started to scream too. I ran out of the bathroom, slap into my mother. I grabbed her leg and refused to let go. I was absolutely terrified. What's the matter? My mother had never seen me so upset. I want to go home, I wailed. We hadn't finished looking around yet. We still need to look at the bath. Don't go in there, I shouted, interrupting her. It's a bad place here. It's bad. I can feel it. I want to go home now. Don't be silly, said my father resolutely. There's nothing bad about this place. What did you see? My mother was stroking my hair, trying to quiet me. I was still sobbing uncontrollably. Don't want to go back in there, I gasped as soon as I had enough breath to speak again. The estate agent looked very puzzled, and in the end, she and my father went in to have a look while my mother stayed in the landing. I was still wrapped around her leg. After a minute or so, they came back and were still at a loss at what had frightened me so badly. They hadn't seen the poor children in the bathtub. Did you help them? I managed. Help who? The children. There were 2 children in the bath. They wanted me to help them, but I couldn't. Children? My mother pried me off herself, transferred me to my father's leg so she could go and take a look. She couldn't see them either. Come back in with me and I'll show you that there's nothing to be afraid of, she suggested. I wouldn't go. I refused to go within 3 feet of the bathroom door, so my parents decided against buying the house. We were all tired and sick of traipsing round houses by that time, so we got into the car and went home. I was still in shock. Had goosebumps all over me and was shaking like a leaf. I was glad to get back to the safety of my comforting bedroom. The next day, my mother had a phone call from the estate agent. Intrigued by my violent reaction to the bathroom, she had done a little research on the history of that particular house. My mother went pale as she listened to the woman recount her findings. It wasn't until I was quite a few years older that my mother told me what the agent had said that day. In the early 1900s, a wealthy, respectable family had lived in what they called the Round House. The father, a successful businessman, had an excellent reputation. No one could have guessed how violent he was towards his wife and children behind closed doors. One day, he lost his temper yet again and drowned his 7-year-old twins, a boy and a girl, in the bathtub. So let me know what you think in the comments below of that story. And also, if you have a spooky story of your own, a true one, that you would like me to share in a future story time, go ahead and send it to me. My email is heytherehummingbird@runbox.com. And otherwise, I'll see you tomorrow for another story. And please like and subscribe. Happy Spooky October!